2024 meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. Out of respect for everyone in attendance, please ensure that your cell phone is on silent mode. Thank you. All right, and Commissioner Squires, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Stand, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening. Let's start with our general administration function, part 1. Are there any presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the committee? Commission?
We have none.
Thank you. Correspondence and staff communication from the Planning Commission Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Chair Delgado. I believe you each should have 8 items of correspondence regarding our agenda item tonight. So if anyone does not have one, we'll provide one to you, but we certainly endeavored to make sure you have all of those, and there are some additional copies on the wall over there as well. So at that time, this concludes staff communication.
All right, thank you. And item number 3, disclosure of ex parte communications. I'm going to start with Commissioner Sablon. None? All right, Commissioner Jackson. Vice Chair Olivares.
Yes. I would like to disclose to the commission that I attended a site tour with project manager Terry Teeble.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Squires.
No.
Okay. Commissioner Linker.
No.
And Commissioner Wong.
No.
All right, and I would like to disclose that I also attended a site visit and meeting with project manager Terry Teeples to learn more about the project approximately a year ago. Thank you. All right, presentations, none. Consent agenda, none. Public hearings, none, which takes us to our regular agenda. All right, item number 4, a public workshop regarding the proposed Liberty-specific plan. And Mr. Tilley, before we proceed.
Yes, thank you, Chair Delgado, for allowing me a moment to interject here. I personally have a real property conflict with respect to this project, so I have not been participating in its review during this time period, and I will not be here to participate in tonight's workshop as well. So I will leave you in the hands of Justin and Bob to take this one forward, as well as Mr. City Attorney. So at this time, I will be departing, and then you can continue on with the rest of your agenda.
All right, thank you. All right, and before we begin, this workshop is intended to provide high-level information about the proposed Liberty-specific plan that's intended to guide development of the Liberty Development Project. And with that, we'll start with a presentation from staff. After the presentation, we will allow clarifying questions from individual commissioners.
Great. Does this work? Must I hit the right button? There we go. Okay, I want to do a few introductions first. My name is Bob Lagomarsino. I was retained by the city because of the circumstance that David just described. The proximity of his home to the project boundary meant that he had to recuse from any participation. The same is true of Andrea Ouse. So I'm under contract to work with Justin Hardy here, who's been the project manager on the Liberty project for years. And I've been working also with Andreas Boer, the assistant city attorney. So you're going to hear from me and Justin tonight. And I also wanted to, Chair Delgado mentioned, and Ms. Olivares mentioned that Terry Teeple had, in representing the project applicant, had given them tours. Terry is in the audience tonight, along with Peter Templeton and Jerry Gonzalez from his team. So they're also here. We don't expect them to make formal presentations, but they're available as a resource just in case. So The down button is the one that does the real work. Okay, here's what we're going to cover tonight. I'm going to take the first two items, just an overview of the purpose of the workshop and an overview of the project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project context. Then Justin's going to talk about the content of the specific plan. Then I'm going to get into a little bit about the commission's responsibility in adoption of the plan and its relationship to the council in that regard. And then I'm going to talk about several associated actions that we'll be focusing on as this project moves forward into the public hearing process. And then we're going to entertain questions and comments from the commission and from folks who are here in the audience. So, as Chair Delgado mentioned, the purpose of the workshop is to do we call it a high-level overview of the project, of the proposed Liberty-specific plan. And that's the intent here, is to get you engaged, to get you and the members of the community who are in attendance and who are viewing on YouTube, I guess, up to speed on what the current state of the plan is, of the specific plan and the process. And then we'll talk a little bit about the next steps, and then provide that opportunity for comment. So the project overview that I'm presenting is, well, first, the principles. The Paik Properties is the applicant. They're the owner of all of the land within the project area. We are working closely with the applicant in doing the final fine strokes on publishing the next version of the plan. So what you may have seen online, it's still on the city's website, is an earlier version of the plan. For all intents and purposes, the substance of the plan is the same. We've been doing refinements that will help make the plan a little bit more administratively straightforward for implementation on the part of city staff and for the benefit of future, or for the current commission and council and future commissions and council. So we're still involved in that. The land use assumptions, the mobility assumptions, the development standards are all the same. We're just wrapping things up a little bit differently. So we expect that the updated plan to be available very soon. So the property covered by the specific plan is approximately 342 acres in Southport, of course, and I have a couple exhibits that I'll show you that give you the graphical representation of this. It's bound on the north by Linden Road and going from east to west, Bastogne Estates, Linden Acres, Linden South, and Parlin Ranch are the existing neighborhoods.
Sorry, Bob, can I interrupt you for just
Yes,
a moment, please? Can we get the presentation on our computers here, please? Thank you.
I'd like it on my computer, too.
Did you get it?
Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Okay. So that's the northern edge of the project. To the east, it's the Sacramento River setback levee, actually, and Village Parkway, for the most part, with the exception of a small area. To the south, it's Davis Road, and to the west, it's the Clarksburg Branch Line Trail. I'm sure you're all familiar of the big three projects in Southport that are moving forward at some stage of development review. And those are Liberty, we're in the northeast village of the Southport Framework Plan, which I'll describe a little bit more in a few minutes. Yarborough is to the southwest of Liberty in the southwest village, and River Park is to the due south, basically, in the southeast village. We have the fortune of being the first out of the chute for formal presentations to you, so I suspect that as those projects come forward to you, you'll hear some of the same things and see some of the same things that we're sharing with you tonight. So on the left is the project vicinity map. In the sort of dark red is that's the Liberty project, and to the south you can see the other two projects I described, River Park and Yarborough. And on the right, on an aerial, you can see the outlines. It's actually translucent of the Liberty project area. So maybe perhaps you can see it a little bit better on your screens. So now I want to cover some more about the project context, and in doing this, it's as much history as anything in terms of how we got to where we are as a city with respect to planning in Southport. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do this because I have some fairly long-standing involvement in the city, and that dates back to when the city incorporated and prepared its first general plan. I was the manager of that project as a pretty young planner, and it was a great experience. And that plan was adopted again in 1990, following incorporation in 1988. At that point, when we adopted the plan, we worked a lot with some of the property owners in Southport and city staff and other interested stakeholders to figure out how to deal with Southport, which seemed so far out into the future in 1988 and 89. And we came up with a planned residential designation, which was sort of a catch-all that was intended to provide opportunities for landowners to come to the city with large project proposals, essentially 200 acres or more, and say, hey, this is how we see it as appropriate to interpret the planned residential. So that's how we got out of the gate with respect to planning in Southport. And I had to get this aerial diagram here to show you what Southport looked like in 1993. So this is a few years after incorporation. I wish it were a little more vivid, but it does show how little development there actually was in Southport at that time. So when I overlay the current parcelization, you can see how development has occurred since 1993. Not all of those orange parcels or orange shaded parcels are new since that 1990 plan, but most of them are. And that is the Liberty specific plan boundary there. You can see how it sort of fits in like a puzzle piece up into the notch created by the existing development pattern. So after a few years of attempting to implement the PR designation in the general plan, the city decided to take a more focused look at how it was going to entertain proposals for development. And I think this was in part a result of pleas from development interests to get a little bit more certainty out of what was expected of them. So the outcome of that process was the development and adoption of the Southport Framework Plan, which is an area plan and technically part of the general plan. The plan was initially adopted in 1995, and it was refined or amended in 1998 to adjust some of the land uses. But one of the key things that the framework plan did was divided Southport up into 4 quadrants or villages. They're called both in the framework plan. And the intent there was for each of those 4 villages to have its own identity and to be separated in ways that gave some sense of place as development evolved. The plans, the maps that were, the land use maps that were created and the circulation or transportation or roadway network that was depicted in those plans were conceptual, with the expectation that as time passed, things would become more refined. So here on the left, it's the entire city with the 4 villages called out. These are the best maps I could find. They're black and white scans, but you can see the 4 villages that I just mentioned. And on the right is the entire Southport area with the Liberty plan area highlighted. As I mentioned, Liberty is in the northeast village of the Southport Framework Plan. Spatially, it probably takes up, about 40% I haven't done this math, but that's what I'm calculating visually here. I should do that so that I can be more precise, but that's the area. And you can see how that, as I mentioned, this sort of conceptual roadway network was depicted, and the shapes of land use, the land use designations had sort of a conceptual arrangement that was the best shot that the city could take at that point in terms of getting out ahead of the development community in ways that might inspire them to do things that were essentially consistent with, but also inspired by these principles. As you can see in the shaded area, I think importantly, because this is sort of a recurring item in ensuing plans, the radial pattern that sort of comes out from the southeastern area, the mid-southeastern area of the Liberty project. So if you keep an eye on that, you'll see it again as we move through. Well, and one of the other principles that I think we can, that's helpful to remind ourselves of and to talk with you about is the idea that these villages would have more intensity near their cores and would become increasingly less intensive, less dense as they move towards the areas on the edges, including the edges where the villages abutted and continue to abut existing developed areas. So that's something that we'll come back to. So a few years after the Southport Plan was adopted, actually almost 10 years after, over 10 years after it was initially adopted, that the city continued to get questions about how it was going to manage proposals for development in the Southport area. So what came of that discussion was the development and adoption of Resolution 0663. And what that did was establish a set of advisory evaluation measures for the commission and the council to consider as they reviewed projects that came before them. And these are verbatim. I'm violating a lot of good PowerPoint protocol, by the way, by putting things in here in their entirety. And oh, by the way, I did want to mention that most of this just reflects the staff report. So if you have questions and need reminders, we'll give you a copy of the presentation and you can see how it tracks with the staff report. So there were 6 main items that the city determined would represent favorably or would be favorably accepted by the city in reviewing projects. The first, and it's sort of basic, but projects need to be consistent with the goals and principles of both the framework plan and the citywide general plan. And the framework plan, again, is part of the citywide general plan. But that's number 1. Number 2, and this relates to what I just referred to about the edge and how we taper out to lower densities as we reach existing areas, is to minimize or mitigate conflicts with existing developed areas. So that was number 2. The third was we have this idea of villages, of discrete villages or distinct villages in Southport. Let's ensure, or let's see to the extent possible that the projects that we're presented with do reinforce that idea of having those village identities or those separate feelings in those 4 quadrants. The fourth, and Justin's actually going to cover some of this when he talks about what a specific plan is and what's required of a specific plan. The city committed to ensuring that as development occurred, that those who were proposing it would assume responsibility for financing the facilities and services necessary to serve that development. And that is one of the statutory requirements of specific plans. So we're sort of in sync there. The next is, and this is another thing that's strongly encouraged and somewhat required by law of specific plans, is to include phasing programs to ensure that the development of infrastructure made sense. And I mentioned with respect to Liberty that it kind of fits like a puzzle piece up into the existing developed areas. So the extension of services from there it's I wouldn't say it's an easy challenge, but it's something that makes sense in terms of where the existing infrastructure ends and where it can be picked up to serve new areas. And then finally, and this relates to how development would relate to new existing development and to the village concept. It's the creation and maintenance of rural residential or green space buffers between villages. And specifically, the 0663 recommended that RR, rural residential, and RE, rural estate zoning, not be changed or not be converted to urban residential designations. And the definition of what constitutes urban, I think, is something that would probably come into the debate. I'm sure it's been in debate for years, but it's something for ongoing discussion with respect to this project and the other projects you're dealing with. And there was one very important transportation provision or stipulation, and that is that no development should occur in Southport that can't be accommodated by transportation facilities that are identified in the city's most current traffic impact study. So traffic impact fee study. So that's a dynamic measure. And of course, the city's planning and design of infrastructure is a dynamic process, so that at any given point in time, the commission and council should be focusing on ensuring that the city is attending to those things. So that was 0663, resolution 0663. The next, and this in 2016, this was the first major update of the general plan since it was originally adopted, and that was General Plan 2035, which is the plan that's currently in place. It was adopted in 2016 after many years of work and labor by staff and various consultants. I think it might have been interrupted by some low economies at some point. It was a comprehensive reconsideration of the existing plan that did a few things specifically with respect to Southport. From a land use perspective, the general plan pretty much just drew in the uses from the framework plan. And I'll show you that in a second. You can see where that is not just mimicked, it's precisely replicated. And that was for the areas that were undeveloped. Other areas had developed in the meantime, and those didn't necessarily develop according to the same shapes and roadway alignments that were reflected in the framework plan, but they did develop, and that's the northern edge of the Northeast Village. From a policy perspective, the 2016 plan, or General Plan 2035, folded in a lot of policy commitments that reflected the principles that were expressed both in the framework plan and in Resolution 0663. So there was a very much a concerted effort to do so. Some would argue that in doing that, it rendered the Southport Framework Plan no longer necessary. That plan is still in place and legally part of the planning framework, but a lot of the intent of the framework plan was folded into the 2016 general plan update. I think maybe many or most of you or all of you may have been involved in the latest update of the general plan that was approved in January of this year, and that focused on the mobility element / transportation element. The intent of those updates was to freshen up the city's approach to transportation planning to address some of the evolution of state law related to transportation planning. And specifically, there were provisions that focused on vehicle miles traveled and ways to reduce or minimize vehicle miles traveled, including by creating greater connectivity in the places that continue to develop in the city, which is a theme that will resonate as we talk more about the Liberty specific plan. So let's see. Here is the 2035 general plan land use diagram. It's an excerpt that focuses on the Liberty area, which is the area highlighted in blue. I had to find a color that wouldn't blend in with the colors selected on the map, but so you can see it there. And one of the things you can see is that radial pattern that originated from the framework plan. So that still remains in the city's general plan, exactly as shown in the framework plan. Let me see, it's going up. Okay, good. I do want to draw your attention to some of the land uses here, and I know it may be easier for you guys or for you folks to see on your screen, but at the edges you can see where the general plan has the lower density residential uses, including to the north where you have some of the rural residential designations, and at the very southern edge where you have the same. And then on to the lower left or to the southwest, it's low density residential. So and then as you move in towards that little half circle, you can see a much larger area that's designated as high density residential. So that's the principle of feathering densities out to become decreasingly dense away from the center of the area. That's the land use diagram from the general plan. As you probably know as commissioners, the zoning map is the principal way that the city implements the land use designations from the general plan. And once again, within the Liberty area, you can see that radial pattern going out from the most intense or highest density zoning at R3 out to the lower density zoning, R1B to the west. That's just typical kind of 6,000 or it's typical single-family residential development. And then in the north, the rural residential, and to the south, the same. Whoops, went in the wrong direction. So that's how we got to where we are as a city, and the Liberty specific plan is picking up the ball to go to the next level of refinement in the approach to planning that the city is overseeing. And Justin's going to talk a little bit about that. Correct, Justin? All right. Just in case you need to know.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. Justin Hardy, Senior Planner. As Bob laid out, the high level, we're getting down to the actual project level detail. So what we have is, what is a specific plan? Currently, we only have two specific plans in the city. Washington in the mid-90s was approved, and then Bridge District in 2009. Those weren't privately initiated. Those were started by the city along with the property owners. The difference is Liberty is privately initiated, as the property owner and their applicant team has brought forth to the city. The specific plan is a comprehensive planning document and a regulatory tool for implementing the city's general plan that will guide development through customized land use and design regulations to provide recommendations and improvements to the public realm. Within the content of this specific plan, it needs to comply with various state law regulations, which includes a land use map, which we have coming up, a diagram, description of the infrastructure that is required, how it would suit and meet the requirements for the existing infrastructure around it, as well as serve the project. Development standards, that would be part of the review as a project, if it were approved moving forward, would then be looked at as reviewed against what's being proposed for consistency. The infrastructure improvements have been included in the document as part of the plan. Those will be documents coming later in a full package to you when they finish some of the minor details. The specific plan will then essentially become a regulatory document that will sit in place of the existing general plan and land use that you currently see now. So it's basically taking what is in the general plan, it's rearranging the puzzle pieces a bit, but the spirit of what was intended, this is how you implement those documents that you see. The village concept, as we've talked on other projects before, it didn't really necessarily materialize that way, and the commercial areas have focused more on Jefferson and Lake Washington and down Jefferson on the other smaller commercial center. There just isn't a huge desire to have any more commercial, but there is a component of that in the spirit of the intent of the village core is proposed in the document. Then once if a specific plan is adopted, it becomes the ownership of the city then to regulate and administer. It's effectively ours. So when we're reviewing this document, the project applicant is representing the property owners. There is no developer at this time. So this is just an entitlement process, and then they may sell a piece of the property to a developer a piece at a time or the whole thing. We have set the plan up to accommodate either which way that happens. We just don't know. So it's also the private sector to then know what is it exactly that you're going to be reviewing and what are you submitting. And so you already have the tools to then bring forth to staff that you already know the roadmap. You have the menu of things that you need to do as part of that. And so it gives them a sense of understanding how the plan is developed, and it provides them some certainty in their implementing the plan that it is a way that it works. So as part of the specific plan itself, there are several elements to it that, there's 14, as you can see. We have a couple of the maps coming up, but it runs through the litany of things that myself and any future would be reviewing plans against. So when plans come in from Washington or Bridge District now, they're compared against a specific plan that's approved. It does provide regulatory approvals. So long as the project itself that comes forth in the future complies with the specific plan, they have basically all the approvals that are needed at the specific plan level, and kind of in the name. So in part of reviewing that, we did the framework plan and the land use. We have the mobility plan, the utility plan in the document itself. The financing and phasing, we have a map of that as well. But part of the criteria of a specific plan is that you look at the financing component, and that is included as required by state law. And when you receive the full specific plan, you will see a comprehensive distillation of a huge data sheet that we will spare you, distilled down into essentially how the financing would work. Provides development standards, so we kind of know what we're getting. It's a roadmap, it's a menu. So what houses go where, what size, which side of lots. It includes some landscape design standards. It has the architectural standards that are part of it. They're kind of cottage, farmhouse, interpretive, contemporary sort of the themes. So in the map, it does, we talked about the land use plan. So in what Liberty is proposing is to basically put a land use on the plan, on the project, that is essentially reorganizing a bit from the plan that you saw earlier that Bob had mentioned, and it will become its own individual. And when you look at this parcel land or this project, you will refer to the specific plan, and rather than looking in the general plan. So that's in the land use plan. It's similar to a general plan, but it's more, general plan is just that, it is very general. This is getting much more specific, hence the name. Different product types, we're ranging from single-family homes, the very more rural on the edge. We have a map, I'll show you that. You know, the basis for the development design standards, we get into much more criteria. So what the design standards for this project would do would basically, the design standards in the framework plan and the general plan, those would the plan, become the rules that we would review a project against. So these are the configuration of the land uses that Liberty is proposing. So you still have a village core element, which is the TC, which is called the Commons, which is a private HOA area that would offer some amenities, along with a small 10,000 square foot commercial component to that. You have kind of a ring road and your Village Parkway to the east that is currently constructed. They will do some additional improvements to complete street that, and then it'll configure the Stone Gate all the way down to Davis Road eventually. So this is essentially the new general plan, if you will, for the Liberty, and the designations therefore of what each of those would then ultimately mean. So when you're looking at this document, you have the same definitions that you would find in the general plan elsewhere in town. This refines those. Here is the land use designation, sort of in a breakdown in a chart showing the single family and the acreage, the designations and the percentage, which is roughly 60% of the project is single family, working all the way down to the single family attached on the smaller lots, duplexes and triplexes, and then you have the multifamily component, the neighborhood commercial and the commons, as I mentioned earlier, and then parks and the public quasi PQP component. So then you take that land use, which is kind of the general plan high level, and then you distill it down into more specific grouping of residential types. And so you have listed the sizes of the lots and the numbers of each of the units as proposed. I will, as previously we have discussed, that there is a component in the project where it has the multifamily, which is part of the affordable component that they will be required to do in their phase one immediately out of the gate. That will be done at the just below the gray area there along Village Parkway, and the setback levy will be in phase one. And we have a map of that as well. And then this is even further refined of what you just saw above. And the estate lots are the periphery that is speaking to the resolution that Bob mentioned, with the lower intensive development on the outskirts of the property, keeping the spirit and the intent of that, and then working your way into much more traditional single-family home styles. And so here's the comparison between how those overlay one another and how they are nestled together. And then here's the site plans, the sort of the guts of the site that we mostly are probably going to look at. Some of the amenities that are included of note beyond the commons area is there'll be several parks, one of which is in the northeast area, just near Asante Lane, the Levee, Village Parkway, and then upper northeast corner, the 9-acre community park that will offer future programming for the residents of the city. Excuse me. And it will include a water tank. Yeah, Thank you. It'll also include a water tank that's required as part of the infrastructure upgrade required to serve the project in itself. It'll have other dispersed parks throughout the community that are, more neighborhood or pocket parks. It will include connectivity to the west to CBLT trail. So if you want to get on up to the high school or the shopping centers, eventually you'll be able to do that on the Class 1 bike trail. Other major note is the current detention basin that was put in as part of Parlin Ranch was a temporary basin. That basin is going to slide south to the ultimate configuration of our stormwater master plan. And so Liberty, as part of their project, will be configuring that to its ultimate need and requirement, and staff has reviewed that for capacity, and that's part of the infrastructure review, that how it all works. And there will be homes that are around that detention basin to provide activity, viewership, and as some recreation as well. So as I spoke to earlier about the phasing, here's the phasing. It's proposed in 3. Typically, phase 1 is primarily coming from north to south. So it will integrate with the existing residential development, with the exception of lots just north of the detention basin near Parlin Ranch, which were actually lotted under the Parlin Ranch subdivision, by the way, that just never developed. So you have, roughly this similar number of units between each of the phases, bringing north to south. As part of the entire package, you review the infrastructure. So when all phases build out, it serves the entire community, looped water lines, to where everything's sized appropriately to work. And you bring in your utilities and your infrastructure in phase 1 to serve phase 1, stub it, and then you would continue on. So the major component, in phase 1 is just getting the start of the infrastructure and things moving as part of the plan, if approved. Mm-hmm. So I will hand over what happens after the plan is taken further, and Bob will finish up the slide projector. There you are.
I'll try not to get all choked up like Justin did. I didn't expect him to get emotional about this, but so I wanted to just go back and do a little bit of a recap. Part of what I talked about was this sort of going from broader strokes to finer strokes in the overall planning framework that the city has had in place for a long time. The specific plan does that on a more focused scale, starting with the land use plan, which again is the regulatory kind of general plan-like map. And then from there, it converts into these development types that are more refined, and the standards for development are all associated with those development types. And I think that you can see here side by side how the principles that were expressed in the framework plan, and that's that concentration of development in the south eastern part of the area and radiating out, that's replicated in this land use pattern. The other thing that you can see here, and I wish the existing roadway network were a little bit more vivid here, but the geometry of the roadway network is continuous here. It extends down without doing those kind of funny curves and shapes that were represented in the framework plan, but it makes a lot of sense. And then this is where we get to the finest strokes, and that's if you look closely at this map particularly, you can see that the lotting pattern on the edges of Liberty look very similar to the lotting patterns and are consciously aligned in several cases to the adjacent development, and that's part of that. How do we match or meet the existing development with similar types of development? So getting to the process, or specifically to the balance of the process and the commission's authority and responsibility for the process, and how your responsibilities relate to the council's authorities and responsibilities. The specific plan by state law must be adopted by the local legislative authority. Of course, in the case of West Sacramento, it's the city council. The city council must have at least one public hearing before adopting the plan. Similarly, the commission must have at least one public hearing. This is not tonight. This is the kickoff workshop. So you're not acting, you're getting prepared to take action during a formal public hearing. The culmination of that will be a recommendation from you to the city council as to what you think, how you think they should act on the plan when it gets into their court. And this is a little bit of inside baseball, but the specific plans can be adopted either by regulation or by ordinance. Adoption by regulation is typically sort of just a policy type document. But in cases where you get to zoning levels of precision, where you had development standards that are very precise, state law says you should adopt those by ordinance. The Liberty Plan would be adopted by ordinance. So that's something that will come back to you for more discussion. In addition to adoption of the plan itself, there's a whole array of associated actions the city will be taking to ensure that the specific plan is set up for effective implementation. I'm starting with the subdivision map because that is principally and legally the domain of the Planning Commission. So you have authority for approval of vesting tentative maps. That's part of the application that will be coming forward in conjunction with the specific plan. Your decision is appealable to the council, but I'm sure the council will trust you implicitly with your responsibility on that front. So there will be general plan and framework plan amendments. Those are going to be focused on the map itself to adjust the broad strokes in the general plan map to appear as the broad strokes in the specific plan appear. And that's similar to what happened in areas that had already developed following the adoption of the framework plan. The general plan map doesn't look like the framework plan for those areas. It looks like the way development actually occurred. So the amendments to the framework plan and the general plan would be focused on the maps to shift to that new organization of similar uses. Again, the city council has primary responsibility for adoption of amendments to the general plan and the framework plan, but they do so with advice from the commission. Here we go. Got to push the right part of the button. I showed you the zoning map. There will be a similar rezoning well, actually, for the zoning map, I almost misspoke. Instead of doing updating the zoning map to look like the framework plan, to look like the specific plan, this is the way we're proceeding as of now, at least. We will show an area that is designated Liberty specific plan with a reference to the specific plan itself for guidance on the regulatory standards. We're not going to try to mimic those in the zoning ordinance. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because the zoning ordinance is already set up with placeholders for the 3 specific plans that were envisioned in the city. Well, 2 that are in place, Washington and the Bridge District that Justin mentioned, and the other placeholder that's in there is for the Liberty Plan, and that will be updated to refer any readers of the zoning code to the specific plan itself. Importantly, the city has also negotiated a development agreement with the applicant that puts in place both assurance of development rights, but also assurance for the city that the development team, the applicant, will provide a whole range of facilities and services and funding for services as part of the approval process. That's one of the things that we'll bring back to you. It's pretty detailed and will show you how the city has worked with the applicant to get to a level of confidence that the project can be implemented as proposed. Again, the city council has the authority to approve the development agreement, but they will do so with advice from you. Finally, the environmental impact report. You've worked with CEQA on other projects, I'm sure. CEQA requires that any project be evaluated for its the potential adverse impacts it may cause on the physical environment. In 2017, the city published a draft EIR, released that for public review, and that document is still in place as the disclosure of potential environmental consequences resulting from implementation of the specific plan. That document was made available for the statutorily required 45-day review plan. The city received quite a few comments, and the legal process that we go through in responding to those comments gets folded into a final environmental impact report that includes those comments, disaggregated into individual comments, and responses to each of those comments from the city concerning the city's opinion on each of those. In addition, the final EIR has what's called an errata section that shows where responses to those comments might result in changes to the analysis in the EIR, mostly for purposes of clarification. So that's going to be coming back to you. Once again, the commission has responsibility for providing its advice to the council concerning certification that the EIR, the combination of the draft EIR and the final EIR, addresses legal requirements and takes care of what the city needs to take care of on that front. One thing that I want to say that's not on this slide, but it's really important, and it's that with specific plans, according to state law, once an environmental impact report is certified, any ensuing residential development can proceed without CEQA analysis, assuming that it's consistent with specific plan. That's one of the benefits of a privately initiated plan that goes to that level of effort, is to get that clearance. And that provides a little bit more confidence to prospective developers who may approach the current owner with an interest in developing. They can feel assured that they'll be able to get through the process without having to jump over the CEQA hurdle, which sometimes can be pretty high. So with that, I will push the right button. Oh, wait, next steps real quickly. We will be moving forward in this process with a public hearing before you, so that you can consider all of the material that I just described, along with the specific plan, the revised specific plan. We're very close to publishing that material, making it available to you and to the public to inform the public hearing process. We're working with the applicant to identify the right timing for holding that hearing. Once you do that and you arrive at your decision on the vesting tentative map and you formulate your recommendations on all the other actions, you'll forward those to the city council, and the city council will take on essentially the same bundle of responsibilities that you have. So those are the next steps. Generally, the next step for this meeting is handing it back to the chair to ask questions, provide comments.
All right, thank you very much, staff, for your presentation. At this time, if the commission members have any questions or clarifications that they'd like.
I'm going to go over there.
Nothing at this time? Going once, going twice? All right. Then, in that case, we'll now open it up to public comment. As a reminder, please keep your comments respectful and limited to 3 minutes for each speaker.
Can we please have Joe Gaydon?
I basically was very pleased to see that this is consistent with the framework plan. That a lot of work went into that plan, and staying consistent with it's important. I also wanted to compliment the developer and Mr. Teeple for all the outreach they've done in our neighborhoods. They've gone out to house after house, talked to people, tried to reassure them more than I've ever seen before. But I think the overall plan is consistent with the framework plan, which is important given all the work that went into that and the planning for that. The one thing I would suggest that the city be careful to do, when you look at this village and the other two, I think it's important that everybody understands that all the roads and the sewer and the water inside those plans are going to be provided by the developer. All the off-sites, street widenings or whatever, the city has to do. And with that being the case, the city needs to bring its transportation plan forward, because it'll do a lot to reduce the citizen concerns for these developments. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Mark? Jill?
I would just like to go on the record to oppose the specific plan as stated.
Thank you.
Jeffrey Andrews?
Well, hi. First of all, I'd like to say that I live on Davis Raceway. Since you guys put the Village Parkway Express in, which is 35 miles an hour, all the way from Highway 50 to Gregory. Yet Davis Road is 40 miles an hour. Right there at Village Parkway, at the trail, Clarksburg Trail, Antioch, Davis Road, Hillary, right there. What's going to happen when the people start dewatering? Everybody's going to lose their wells. We're all on wells out there. My main concern is that. I worked for an environmental company. I would know what dewatering does. I lived in a place which Granite Construction was on Jefferson Avenue, and Harmon came out and dewatered. They lost the well. Who had to pay for it? The city didn't pay for it. The homeowners had to pay for it. Davis Road, it's crazy. People are doing 60 miles an hour going down there. Somebody's going to get hit or killed at Clarksburg Trail. They have horses that go through there constantly. There's a ranch right there on Harmon. Harmon and, was it Hillary or Partridge? Kids are constantly riding horses on that trail. I don't know how many times I've heard horns and people yelling at cars because they won't slow down. So that's it, and I'm really concerned about the dewatering, people losing wells. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danny Langford?
Thank you. And just for a moment, if you would please state your name clearly so commission can take
Danny Langford.
Thank you.
Good evening. So I will agree with the gentleman, Davis Road needs to be mitigated. The city needs to take care of it. 40 miles an hour is ridiculous. It's rural residential out there. And I do live off a dirt road, off of Davis on an acre. I will say this is one of the only developers that we've ever worked with that actually has listen to our resolution. And I will give you a little history because, and I'm glad to see it's part of this packet, but staff is incorrect. Save Our City came up with a resolution because in the 11th hour, they were called by the former mayor behind closed doors at a meeting because we had enough signatures to take a measure to the voters that they would be able to vote on every development before it was allowed in this community, just like what they do in Davis. So in the 11th hour, some of our top people in our group were called back behind closed doors, and that's where the resolution came to life. It was put in place to give us buffers to protect our properties. So for instance, most of us in this area between the Clarksburg Trail and the levee on Davis have minimum acre lots. There is one property there, I think, that has a half or 3/4 acre, but most of us are minimum acre lots. Therefore, the buffers were put in place. And I will say, when I met Terry Teeple back in 2008, I was coming at him kind of hot because they had a totally different project planned, and it was high density right up against us. I will say he listened, he worked with us. Over these numerous years, he has worked with us, and I appreciate the half-acre lots to quarter-acre, although I still want my 1-acre lots, and he knows that. And I appreciate that there's no ingress or egress off their project onto Davis, although I do stay concerned about Southport Parkway because it is a raceway on Davis Road where people cut across. I'm for smart growth. I knew when we bought our house 28 years ago that development was going to go in all around us. Smart growth is what we wanted, not the high density that's being crammed down our throats that the city keeps trying to do. I do appreciate that Terry has worked with us, and you won't hear that from me from a lot of developers. But I do remain concerned about the traffic, about our infrastructure, and our resolution does call for the infrastructure to be in place before the projects are approved. But I will say that this developer has worked with the neighborhood, at least the neighbors on Davis Road, and I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pat Flint?
Thank you, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Pat Flint. And I've been involved in the Southport Framework Plan and Design Plan since its inception. So I know everything that we had out there and everything that we wanted out there, and a lot has been taken away from us. We fought the high-density zero lot lines at that time. We are still fighting the high density out there. I will say that this developer and the owners of the property have been very friendly to the residents and to those of us who live in Southport. This design is the closest that comes to our Southport Framework Plan, except for densities have been added through the city by rezoning and by the 2035 rewrite, where they even added more density out there. Now, the levees have taken away some of the acreage for these properties, especially Liberty and River Park. But they're still required to have the same densities, even though they have less land. As a result of our fighting and our trying to come to a resolution, we did create the resolution 06-63 because we had, in good faith, that the city would continue with the development and design plan for Southport. They continually ignored our resolution and are continually still ignoring our resolution. None of the properties out there should be occupied until our infrastructure is in place. There was a traffic study done at that time. All of our intersections at that time were F. I'm sure there's still Fs out there, even though we have Village Parkway in place. Village Parkway was supposed to be a 4-lane road. Jefferson Boulevard was supposed to be a 6-lane road, but that was mitigated away by the city, along with our green belts out in Southport, along with our animal habitats out in Southport, They mitigated it away just by talking to some people and changing the what do you call it? Anyway, the plan. Well, I got off key. I will say that I cannot talk highly enough about these developers. They have, for the past, I think Terry people said 17 years, whatever, however long, they have been involved in keeping us informed with their plans. We have also seen what the city has made them do. Now, when it comes to the development agreements, I'm going to have a lot more comment because I don't think that they should have to comply with some of that stuff. But they did, and they're willing to work with everybody. And like I say, I can't just speak enough about how they have treated us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Kimio Bazette?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kimio Bassett, and I am with Turton Commercial Real Estate out of Midtown Sacramento, just across the river. And you may be familiar, but we are representing the city on the Club Pheasant RFP process through selection, which you're probably familiar with. It should also be noted that I do not work for the Liberty Project in any way. However, I have spoken with Mr. Teeple in detail about the project over some time, and I do believe it is extremely thoughtful and detailed in all the right ways and indicative of the type of broad product type as far as housing is concerned that we are very much in need of in the region. I'd also like to say that separately, as a cyclist, their influence on the new levee is greatly appreciated by the cycling community and all sorts of recreational folks to see out there, families, runners, the like, wildlife. But generally speaking, I am supportive of the project, and I think I can probably speak for a number of people in the real estate community with that sentiment. So thank you.
Thank you.
There are no further requests to speak.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. We'll now allow further discussion from the commissioners.
Well, I'll go ahead and start it off. I know, and I believe it was the setback levy that took away some of the acreage from the project originally. Is that correct? And one of the concerns that I did have in going through the materials was the density of the project. And I found it interesting to see that in the presentation where I think it was in the resolution where it said no more development in Southport than no more development in Southport than can be accommodated by facilities identified in the city's current traffic plan. When was the latest traffic plan that was done in relation to this project? Number one, what were the results of that plan, and how does this fit in line with that?
Hi, Jason McCoy, Supervising Transportation Planner and Division Manager for the City of West Sacramento. The plan for the general plan, circulation and mobility element was completed back in 2017. Since then, the mobility element was updated in 2024, just most recently approved by the City Council. With regard to the data that's within that, back in 2017, it was a comprehensive plan that was prepared. In 2016, sorry, for the general plan. 2017 was actually the Liberty-specific plan. So the Liberty-specific plan was and still remains consistent with the latest traffic analysis that was done for the city. Again, it was updated in 2024. The traffic data was not, because the traffic data remains consistent. Reason being is because we had a pandemic, which forced everything down, and as those remember, the skies got blue and people were not driving. it also changed the traffic patterns substantially. Those traffic patterns have not necessarily recovered. They have on freeways. You talk to Caltrans and the freeways are pretty much back to pre-pandemic levels. In addition, there has been growth that's happened substantially in our region. However, that substantial growth has not happened in West Sacramento. Our growth rate is about 1.03%. For the region, it's about 1.33. As an example, for Roseville, it's 2% or a little bit more than 2%. So as far as regional growth goes, we're still behind the region in general. So there has not been a substantial change that's gone beyond what the growth was anticipated in the general plan in the last 7 years. We are, however, going to be updating our traffic analyses just to see what do the traffic patterns actually look like now, because there still are a number of people that are staying home, they're working from home. There's a number of people that have differing work hours. Work hours have changed for even in the city of West Sacramento, where folks are starting later or they're starting earlier. So your typical peak AM, PM traffic patterns are just not what they used to be. And we're seeing that all the way across the region. And in talking with SACOG, who's our the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, who does the regional traffic model, they have not seen substantial change as a region, but there's acknowledgement of changes that are happening locally. As you know, state workers still are not back to working their regular hours, but they are anticipated to do so. We do have a number of state workers that live here in West Sacramento. The City Council has authorized funding for the Transportation Division under our traffic engineer, who we just recently are hiring, to go ahead and do a full analysis for the city and see what are the current AM, PM peak hours? Have they shifted? Have they moved a couple hours here, a couple hours there? Are we seeing more afternoon travel as opposed to before, where you just see people starting work at, getting to work at 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., taking their lunch, going home anywhere between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So we want to see what do those patterns look like now. We want to see what does our traffic look like now, knowing that we have not experienced the amount of growth that the region has experienced. So in our opinion, the data still remains consistent. When we looked at the update in 2024, we found it was still consistent, and our consultants agreed with that. The City Council adopted the mobility element in 2024. So that's the update. But again, we'll see what happens with this latest update. But it should also be noted that anything that is found with the Liberty specific plan that could potentially impact off-site traffic, that's going to be mitigated as part of their environmental impact report. So I'm sure that's already identified in the report, and you can review that.
Right. Now, it says in the report that we have that it's proposed for 1,503. I guess would that be considered rooftops for this development? What was the original before the loss of acreage? Oops.
That's an excellent question. I don't know that the setback levy actually ate into the residential area, Terry. Was there a reduction in units in your site plan as a result of the setback levy?
Yeah, Terry, if you'd like to address the commission.
I mean, because I think the reason for the question is because I think it's, if there was a reduction in terms of the amount of land that was originally provided for the project, but yet still the density still remains the same, that's a concern for me. I'll be honest, I'm very selfish because I live down there. Sure. Number one, and then also with a higher density, if the density is still the same or at similar levels to it was before, as was addressed earlier, with Jefferson Boulevard down that way still only being 2 lanes, 2 very bad lanes coming up, and I don't expect that this would fall directly on the shoulders of this project, but with all the projects that are proposed to be going in down there, Yarborough being the other one, the next one I know that's going to be coming before us, those are also things that need to be addressed, because I have very real concerns as far as the infrastructure is concerned. The roads being one, The fact that we really we have 2 fire stations down there. The closest one to this development would be Station 42, which is probably the closest one to my house, but 42 is a very small station. And I don't know if some things were to happen, if a single station would be able to adequately service that area as it continues to grow. And I didn't see anything in the plan that kind of addresses that need as well.
I would say, Commissioner Jackson, prior to Terry responding to the question about whether or not his property was affected by the setback levy, the other questions you're asking are also excellent questions, and they will be part of what we bring back to you with the public for the public hearing, and that includes the development agreement, the DEI, the draft, the final EIR, so those, and the plan itself. So the answers to those questions would not be found in the staff report. So that, Terry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Terry Teeple. I'm the project manager for Liberty. More specifically, Commissioner Preston, we faced a very interesting dilemma in our planning process because about 11 years ago now, it was identified by the Corps of Engineers that there was a deficiency in the existing levee, which was on the old River Road, basically an ag levee from the early 1900s. We actually put our project in neutral, and we had to wait until we knew what that take was going to be for the levee, the full length of our project. And we're about 1.5 miles of the 6.1 mile total levee, and we're right in the middle of it. So we were pretty much hamstrung, and we put the project in neutral. We have not changed the number of units or the density of the unit of the project in about 13 years, 12, 13 years. And we waited until what I'll call the west side of the right-of-way of Village Parkway was set, which is exactly mirroring what they needed for the levee. That's what set Village Parkway, and more importantly, the west side of it, which is where we are. We're west of Village Parkway. So the density has not changed. We're still 1503. The draft and final EIR reflect that that is still the density that we are planning to, that we have to mitigate for in all aspects. So in short, the density has not changed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jason McCoy again, Supervisor Transportation Planner, City of West Sacramento. I felt compelled to respond to some of your questions you have there. There's a number of improvements infrastructure-wise that are required for these developments to move forward. One of which, Mike McGowan Bridge, was already put in by the City of West Sacramento. Village Parkway has already been put in as well. That leads all the way down through the project. However, there will be additional lanes that are going to be put in as part of the development. With regard to what's happening with Jefferson, the city is looking at all of these developments together. We're not looking at each individual one in a vacuum. So we are aware there are improvements that need to be done. I believe that we have 4-lane improvements going past the high school all the way to, I want to say it's Linden. And then from there, it narrows down to 2 lanes. So there is a segment of that the city of West Sacramento would be responsible for widening out. There's also a segment that development to the south is going to be required. The Yarborough project will be contributing to widening that out as well. So there's a number of triggers that are happening as far as various infrastructure improvements for roadways that are going to be part of each of these individual projects. And the city is working to try to get these done as quickly as possible in advance of some of these projects moving forward. Clarksburg Branch Line Trail, for instance, I was just very happy today that SACOG Transportation Commission went ahead and recommended approval for us to get $1.9 million to match our other funding that we have. We're extending the Clarksburg Branch Line Trail all the way to Clarksburg. By the time it's done, you'll be able to ride your bike from Clarksburg all the way up to Folsom. So we are currently in design on 3 miles of that segment going from the high school where it currently stopped, the paving stops, all the way to the southern city limit. And I've already put in a request with our 2 state senators and our congresswoman who have all supported receiving $7.3 million for us to do construction of those trail improvements. So these are just examples of what we are currently working on as a city in conjunction with the developers as well as infill development that's happening to try to make these things happen as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I have a question. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have plans for widening Davis Road for this, for the Liberty project?
Yes, currently Davis Road are 9-foot travelways. To put that in perspective, if you've crossed the I Street Bridge, the current one, those are 9-foot travelways. That's why it's such a dangerous route.
Right.
In addition, there's that large trench that's on the north side. So the plan is to, as we're doing with all of our streets that are collectors or minor arterials or major arterials as identified in our general plan currently, to make sure that those are safe streets for bicycling, for walking. If you're disabled, you are able to get down that street without any kind of harm or issue. Those streets, I believe, are going to be widened to 11 foot, which is our standard. We're putting in the standard sidewalk, and we're putting in our standard bike lanes in there.
So there'll just be one lane each direction?
That's correct.
You don't think there needs to be 2?
Not according to any of our general plan analyses, no.
Okay, and that improvement will take place before the beginning of the build out in Liberty?
I'm going to have to turn to our folks here who have more of the information on that.
Okay, and another question, will Stonegate, the road, Stonegate Road or Boulevard, will it be widened or any improvements be made?
There's no intent to widen. The streets that are currently in place, such as Mojave Drive, Stonegate, those were all developed with the knowledge of forethought that there were going to be developments planned to the south. So the assertion that they just don't have the capacity, that's an incorrect assertion and just not true. That those roadways, the capacity of those roadways are sufficient. Okay. Now the question is there speeding? Is there traffic? Yes, currently there have been incidents of speeding down Mojave, down Stonegate. Those are the neighbors of these folks that are here that are speeding. We have on a number of occasions asked the police department to go out there and drop a trailer. Our trailers have radar speeds and they have cameras. And we have been able to find people's license plates, locate who the offenders are, which have typically been the same person, and let them know, we are aware of your speeding. There have been a number of complaints in the neighborhood. We have your license plate. We're asking you not to do this again. So any of these issues that are currently perceived are not capacity issues. They're operations issues or speeding issues. Operations issues are something that we can address as a development proceeds. So if we are seeing in the future, hey, there's a backup here at this intersection, as a transportation group, we can go out there, do an analysis, take a look and see from an engineering perspective, what is the problem with this? Why is this not operating the way it should be operating? And that is all done under an intensive California state requirement where we follow what is called the MUTCD. That's the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. We cannot, by law, go out there and drop a stop sign to slow traffic. We cannot put in a signal where there isn't one warranted. So we have to do a transportation study that follows state law that says, here's the delay, here's the recommended action, and here's what we do to make that work, which we can do anywhere in the city. We just have to, if there's a problem, and I've put some flyers out there for our Vision Zero plan. That's the plan to get to, that's correct, right there. So it's a plan that the city is putting together that aims to have 0 fatalities, 0 injuries on our streets by, I believe, 2030. And so what we're asking the public to do is let us know, where are there problem intersections? Where are there issues that you've perceived? And then we can go ahead and address those on a case-by-case basis with the goal of ultimately making the safest city possible on our streets.
One more question. So Davis Road will have 11 feet going one way, 11 feet going the other way, then a bicycle lane on each side, then a sidewalk?
I believe there's also going to be the multi-purpose lane that's happening in addition to that. So the actual cross-section could probably be put up by the planning group here. But I can tell you, as far as a transportation perspective, I reviewed that road and determined that definitely the existing condition is woefully inadequate and unsafe. And so I provided recommendations to our staff, and that was incorporated by Terry into the plan.
And I think we'll get more information on that at the public hearing.
Yeah, during the public hearing, you'll see all of the cross sections for the streets throughout the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will add, and Jason did not mention it, but there's also an equestrian trail proposed for the north side of Davis. And I think one of the speakers mentioned equestrian act.
I have one follow-up question from Steeple, if you could. The 1503, is that inclusive of the affordable rental units and the senior apartment and condos and townhomes?
Yes.
Is that inclusive of those as well?
Yeah, Terry, you don't need to come up for that. Yes, it's all of the units combined.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I just have a quick follow-up for Mr. McCoy. How do we determine the speed limits on the roads? Is 40 appropriate for Davis, or how is that determined?
So our engineering division just recently took an action to the city council whereby they evaluated streets throughout the city, did some updates to the speed limits based on, again, an engineering study that's consistent with California state law. There are requirements that say you can't make the speed faster than within a certain percentile. You can't make it slower than within a certain percentile, except in the condition that there is a school or senior housing, some other sensitive receptor that's in that area. So that was, I cannot recall exactly when it went to city council, but it was very recent for updates, and that is done periodically. So I believe Joanna Ortiz in our engineering division is the one who put that together. We'd be happy to get you that staff report so you could take a look at it. But that is something that happens continuously through the city. So if there is an issue on a city street, that goes into the queue of those that we are going to collectively analyze and then from there address. If it's analyzed and determined that there is no issue, then there is no action that moves from there. That means that the capacity of the roadway, the current speeds that are analyzed there. So what happens is they drop a trailer, radar trailer again, and they take a look throughout the day for a certain extended period of time, period of a couple of days, and they see what is the percentile of speeds that are there. And you're going to have some that are driving super fast. That always happens, even in my neighborhood. And then you've got the ones that are driving extremely slow, and that also happens. But there's also a graph in the middle, and you know, they take a look and see, well, where is the peak of this graph hitting? Is it at the current speed limit? Does it need to be reviewed and adjusted? So that's how it's done here in the city. It's done in all the cities.
I'm just trying to wrap my mind around. I think Mr. Tilley told us something about that before. But so if people always speed beyond the speed limit, we can't ever reduce it? Is that?
No, you cannot necessarily decide that you're going to unilaterally reduce a speed limit in order to try to force people to drive a certain speed. There are laws against doing that. It's called a speed trap. And once you do that, if an officer goes out and decides he's going to write a ticket based on this new posted speed limit that you put in, but it did not follow the correct state required study, they are not going to be responsible for that ticket, and the judge will dismiss it. This is where you hear the term speed trap, and that's where you may see, okay, 15 miles an hour, but it's on a highway. No, that's not going to happen. So that is the reason why we as a city have to be very careful about what we're doing. If we throw a stop sign in and we weren't required to do that per the analysis, and someone gets injured, the city will become liable. So this is where we have to take this very seriously and follow the state law to the T.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, one more. No, you're not. Yeah, you're good.
One of the gentlemen mentioned that he was concerned, that spoke tonight, mentioned he was concerned that the widening and improvements of the streets has to be paid for by the city rather than the new developer. What is your understanding?
The answer is it depends. So there are some things in development agreements, and I hope I'm not overstepping. This is getting into the territory of our planners here. But there are development agreements that come forward with projects. Those development agreements say, here are the things that you're going to work on or provide as part of this project. It could be, hey, you need to extend the Clarksburg Branch Line Trail. Well, it may not be necessarily directly adjacent to that project, but we know that residents are going to be using that trail. Or, there could be, say an impact somewhere in the city that's been problematic, and we ask the developer, hey, we know it's less expensive for you to do this because you're already developing something over here. Can you help the city out and do this for us? Because it'll benefit your residents as well as surrounding residents. That's something that could be in a development agreement. And I heard earlier, there's, some people may not think that a developer should have to do X, Y, or Z. Other people have asked, hey, we really want this developer to do X, Y, and Z. And that's why it is a negotiation that gets brought before the city council and approved or amended.
So yet to be determined.
Yet to be determined. There are things I think I mentioned earlier, like in Jefferson, that we know the city is going to be responsible for doing some of that. We know that the developer is going to be responsible for doing some. And there have been things that have changed over time from when these developments were approved. Complete streets are not a new thing, but enforcing complete streets is, where you say, no, you must have sidewalks, you must have bicycle lanes. Some of these developments may have gone through before bicycle lanes were required. So that is something that we come back and go, no, this is modern times. We do need active transportation. It does help with the regional greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and therefore we're going to require that, even though it may not have been before.
Thank you. All
So
right.
in addition to the items related to the DA, we also have a couple other mechanisms by which infrastructure improvements are going to be addressed through this project. Some of it is through CEQA mitigation measures, and then there's also for traffic, there's a traffic impact fee that the developer pays on each unit. And so that goes to funding improvements that are typically put in by the city. But in some bigger projects, the developer will actually put in a piece of infrastructure in exchange for fee credits. So we'll be talking more about that during the public hearing when you guys have all of the different pieces in front of you. But there are many ways to address those impacts.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think we can tell that traffic and speeding around this development are important to all of us here on the commission. With that being said, is there anything specific that any of the commissioners would like to direct staff to do in preparation for the public hearing?
I guess it's a more general thing. If we could get the materials a few weeks before the hearing, I imagine there's going to be a lot with just the EIR itself. So if we have a few weeks ahead of time.
Yes, please.
We already planned on doing that, but yes.
Thank you.
If you want to get ahead of things, the draft EIR is available. The final EIR itself will not be that big, but the draft is pretty voluminous.
I know Mr., if I get the name right, Jeffrey Lantis spoke, and he mentioned that the project would cause dewatering, that people would lose their wells, and I wanted to know if someone can explain what that's about. But what exactly is dewatering?
Dewatering, I believe the gentleman is referring to drawdown of the groundwater and the aquifer that those who are on wells are relying on. The Liberty Project is not going to be relying on wells. It's going to be using surface water that's treated at the Christophe treatment plant in the northern part of the city.
So are we aware of any developments where the people along the edge of the development that have wells have had this problem?
I'm not.
Is that something that's
We should look
been
into.
brought up by a member of the public during the public comment period? Will that be addressed in the final EIR if that was brought up back in 2017?
Well, yeah, the EIR does address potential impacts on groundwater, and the conclusion, the draft EIR is that there is no impact as a result of that because of the reliance on surface water for this project.
Okay.
Well, I would recommend that this gentleman give us more information if that's a concern. Sounds like people aren't thinking it is a concern. But we would like more information so that we can make sure that, because we don't want your well water to go out. Nobody wants that.
Is that within the purview of the staff?
We can check with the remaining planning staff to see if anybody's aware of a project where this has been an issue between now and the public hearing.
Thank you.
None of us sitting here have run into that as an issue with prior development.
Excuse me, sir, we're talking about dewaterization. And what happens is these people bring in these enormous tanks. They're going to come in and they're going to pump groundwater out 24 hours. Monitor water. Water out. And what happens is it drops that water. People on wells, most of their wells go down to about 20, 25 feet. Facings collapse. The well. I've seen it happen more than once. Like I said, Jefferson and Harmon, perfect example.
What,
Granite
Chair,
construction.
if I may?
Yeah, please.
That may very well be the circumstance somewhere, but we don't see any relationship between that having happened and the project that we're dealing with this evening.
So you said you don't use groundwater then?
Correct.
So where do you get your water from? City?
Sacramento River.
So
Just to be crystal clear on this issue, the project is not intending to rely on groundwater at all. It'll be served entirely by surface water.
Understood.
Okay.
And as I stated a few minutes ago, I look forward to seeing the final EIR and how that's addressed. Thank you.
Maybe it would be helpful if you could define for us what you mean when you say surface water, because I have no idea.
Okay, so surface water is water that flows, in the case of West Sacramento, flows down the Sacramento River, goes into the city's water treatment facility, and is then piped throughout the city, properties that are connected to that water to that water system. Groundwater, on the other hand, is where a property has a groundwater well and then pumps that water just to serve that property, or in some cases, a few properties share a well. And those properties are not connected to the city's treatment plant.
So then would it be safe to assume then that not only this project, but future projects also will be tapping into the city's water supply that's coming from the plants and not dealing with the
Correct. Projects of this scale never rely on groundwater. They always have to find a more reliable, centralized source of water.
Right.
Okay. Any other direction from any of the commissioners? No?
I just had a comment. I do appreciate the project applicant's his efforts in reaching out to the community. We did hear from several members of the community, and they mentioned your efforts, and I appreciate that. I think we all appreciate that, because we often hear for some of the people today who have not had such good experiences with applicants. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, going off of that. On the Planning Commission, we're here for you as a community too. We represent you too. And we want to we want to look at the issues that you bring. I noticed that we got a lot of correspondence that came in just today or yesterday. If you can get that to us a lot earlier, copies were then forwarded to us. If you can get that to us a lot earlier, and if you can document things and specify that, then that will help us.
All right, thank you.
But generalities coming in at the last minute don't help us too much.
All right, sorry, one thing from me. I would like to see the applicant address specifically the points, the 6 points in 0663 at our public hearing, and the steps that the applicant and the landowner have taken to address those and make sure that they are abiding by at least the spirit, if not the letter of 0663. A couple of other things. Considering that there's going to be quite a few hefty documents coming our way, it would be appreciated to provide both printed copies of the master plan and the vesting subdivision tentative maps for us, so we have something to refer to and mark up in addition to the electronic copies that are presented to us.
Okay.
Thank you. And yeah, looking forward to doing a lot of reading this summer. All right. Anything else from any of the commissioners before we move to item number 5? Commissioner communications. Anything? I'd like to thank members of the public who came out tonight and everyone who submitted written comments as well. We did receive these quite late this afternoon, so we haven't had time to review them all, but we will, and we will take your comments under consideration. So thank you for your patience this evening. It was a long presentation and a long meeting, relatively. 2 things. One, I would encourage you to take the West Sacramento Vision Zero survey. As Jason stated, it does give you the opportunity to point out problem areas in your neighborhood or around the city. I've done both this and the traffic survey myself, identifying specifically places where I've almost been hit on my bike, places where I see people speeding, running stop signs, etc. It does provide a lot of information, and hopefully the city does a lot of good with it. In addition, there is a public workshop coming up, and let me find it just a moment, please. And it's regarding Yellow Bus. So if you're concerned about traffic impacts in the Southport area, it could be good to come voice your opinion. So we'd like to see more frequent public transportation options and active transportation